Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Tuesday night. I am happy to tell you that I am coming to you live from Tampa. I have been on the road for 2 days, driving to a funeral here in Florida. And I'm telling you, it has not been the best 2 days for me. But I am happy to talk to you about some of the hot topics in October, which include cancer. Lots of folks have written in about this question. It's a complicated answer, and so I thought I would take time to be complicated tonight. So stick around if you're interested in cancer and the effect of blood sugar. I will give you a big old clue that I am not fasting, so I'm actually a little nervous to show you my numbers here because, that 21-day metabolic boost, we need to go back to it because I did so good. Those 21 days where I was checking my numbers, I was showing everybody in class, I was eating sardines, I was not cheating, I was not emotionally rescuing myself during a funeral. So Grandma Rose's siblings are 8 of them. So there's a blood sugar of 87, and we're counting down the ketones. She has 8 of them, right? So she was in a beautiful large family, and ketones of 0.4. Definitely, I am super thankful to be drinking ketones tonight because I feel it. I feel the low energy. I feel the emotion of the last couple of days. Where attending a funeral, it's been a while since I've been to a funeral, and the last one was really emotional for me. So walking into a funeral, seeing the reflection of my mother in her siblings, and then it's been a tough couple of days. So it turns out Pace, Florida is a nice little hometown if anybody's ever been there, right near Pensacola. My husband said, I think we're in an alternate universe because in Pensacola, I don't know if they have an aversion to electronic cars, but we couldn't find a charging station. And we we had to search for Starbucks. Let's put it that way. But the people were great. It was fun to see cousins that I last saw at like 12. And honestly, the idea of a funeral was not what I was looking forward to this week. I'm happy to say this is a nice place to be back in the world of Tampa, and I'm going to do some teaching here tonight. Glad to see everybody's commenting, can hear, and again, that praise is nicely received tonight. I am going to hop over here and do this. I do have a couple of quick announcements, really, really quick. Number one, I am very thankful to say all of you that wanted to buy the product that we are trying to get rid of, and the reason we're getting rid of it is because we have to. You have to sell so many of your products in a certain period of time in order to be on this list. Anyway, we failed. We did not sell enough, so we are getting kicked off the list. So we have till the end of the year to get rid of the rest of this product. So 25% off for anybody who buys 4 bags or more. It's a great deal, honestly. The expiration on this doesn't happen for 2 years. So if you have not bought this, I think there's probably only a few weeks of this product left based on the rate that folks have been buying it. So give yourself a reward, or if you have anybody that wants ketones throughout the holidays, it'll be good for 2 years. And truly is the greatest. All of my cancer patients, I put this on. It was just so easy to keep their ketones high. So fun, not just to watch how easy it was for them to succeed, but it tastes good. It's always nice when you can give folks a recommendation, not just that works well, but also that tastes good. A couple of really quick reviews. Again, thank you for those that give that take time to write a book review. As an author, I didn't understand how important this was until I'm begging you to leave a review. But I also really have appreciated how well folks improve their, this wasn't refreshed. I was on, this is the same one. How well folks did at improving their their lives with something that I wrote down and put on publication, and then I've never met them. So I like to go to the most recent reviews, and then, this really is still September 28th. So I read these reviews last time, so I'm not going to read them again. I could go to a couple other books, but I won't do that tonight. So again, I do appreciate all of those reviews, and it does matter. Like in the world of rankings, when you guys leave reviews, I can always see that the rankings go up inside the metrics. So I appreciate it. I really, really do. I have a couple of ideas for another book, and every time I look at how hard it is to get folks to buy them and then leave reviews, it makes me really nervous. But I have the idea of a really good book. I just don't know if I have the energy to do it right now. So let me begin by saying thank you for those that have written in questions. The last couple of lives, I have reviewed the questions afterwards. And you know what I do with some of the folks that don't get their questions answered is that I use them as a bit of inspiration for some of the pre-recorded or the fancy YouTube videos. This is a live, so it's not got editors, and if I speak incorrectly or if my sound doesn't work, you guys are the ones that tell me. So thank you for that. But I also, I find that when I look at the metrics on the backside of how well a YouTube video does, when I am specifically answering a question from a patient, it does so well. In fact, I recently did this online course that was 21 days long. It was to metabolically boost the folks that were in the class. And I did not guarantee to ever do it again, but I have, for the last 2.5 weeks, just really studied the metrics of how patients did in the background. And I think it would be probably be sinful to not do it again. That I cannot believe how much of an improvement these people had in 21 days. I actually can't believe how much I had. If you've been watching the show over the summer, I had 3 teammates, I had all the teammates do a hemoglobin A1C, which is an average blood sugar. Prick our fingers, mail in our tests, and do an average blood sugar. And I hadn't done one in a few years. Mine went from a lovely 4.8, which I thought was great bragging rights. It is great bragging rights. And then, it went up. It went up a lot. I think it was 5.6. So then we said, all right, let's check it in a month. Even though if you were in my clinic, your insurance would not let me check it for 3 months. The beauty of point of care is you can do what you want. So for $40, I said, everybody, let's check it again in a month. We kind of didn't quite get it done in a month. It took us 5 weeks instead of 4 weeks, but I had dropped my A1C from 5.6 to 5.3. That's a really important number for tonight's lesson tonight. So I'm reviewing that on purpose. And I thought, okay, we're going to do this again in a month, knowing that the 21-day course is in there. Well, I need to do it right now. I need to recheck my A1C right now because that course did so much for helping me stick to it and really post my numbers for everybody to learn from. And I just did a better job when you guys were watching me. I guess that's normal, but I also learned that in the course, there were 10 cases that I took and really kind of dissected, used them as teachable moments. And much like I do with the comments that come in on the, we don't always get all the comments answered in the show, but looking at the questions allows us really good format for me to imagine you as I'm answering that question on a video. So I appreciate it when you write in your questions. Tonight's topic is a little heavy. I've had lots of people write in about their cancer questions over the years, actually, and I will be very careful when I try to answer them. But I decided to dive into this topic a little more tonight using a couple of studies. There are 2 studies that I'm going to go through, and I'll put the links in the show notes when we are done. But they talking about studies to a large audience, there are many people's eyes who can gloss over. So I would encourage you that hang in there. There's a punchline at the end. I am really trying to watch the comments as I go through this. So if you have questions like that does not make any sense to me, I'll try to restate that as we go through this. Reading studies is you have to be careful about who you're thinking about, who you're talking to, and how you interpret it. So I'm going to be really choosy with my words today, and I hope I do not misspeak. Again, it's a live show. I also want to just be very mindful for those that are. It is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and you can't be in the business of loving on your neighbor without knowing someone who has struggled with breast cancer or had a big life event due to breast cancer. Unfortunately, our understanding of cancers has dramatically increased over the years. That if we could have taken this information back to 2 decades ago, I'd like to think that we could have prevented a lot of people's suffering, a lot of people's cancer deaths. The link that we know between breast cancer survival, just cancer survival, and what happens with the treatments that we give for cancer, and the correlation to what you're fueling your cells with. Are you fueling them with carbohydrates? Have you really changed the chemistry inside your system, and now we have at least a portion of the time that they're fueling them with ketones? Watching to see the outcome differences of how that affected the patient has been something I've really I've taken to heart. You go to enough. This funeral was for a family member, but you go to enough funerals for patients, and it just becomes a different intensity at which you try to get a message across in a short visit in their life. So as I talk about this tonight, I'm trying to be very careful that I speak clearly on what these findings are showing us. So I am going to keep an eye on the questions. So when you're typing questions in, my teammates will copy and paste that over to a document that just helps me organize the thoughts at the end, and we'll try to answer your questions at the end. And we really do look forward to that. So let's begin. Let's go in here and go to here. So this specific article is something, I'm going to pull this in front of me so I can write on it without turning my head too much. So when I look at this article, it is from the British Journal, the BJC, British Journal of Cancer, of course, yes. And I liked this article because there are some obvious statements out there that that patients with diabetes have an increased risk of cancer. That has been a very easy thing to talk about. You can Google that and find the answers. We're going to go through some of the answers here in just a second. But what I'm very impressed by on this one was to really take a deeper look into the question, if they don't have diabetes. I don't have diabetes, so why would I want my A1C to be, why do I want my bragging rights back of somewhere near 4.8? I'd love 4.5, but I need to set a goal I can get to right now. I don't know that if I do like I've done the last week, I'm not going to get there. But if I have that 21-day course about every month, I think I would get there in like 5 months. Meaning being in a group of people where you check your numbers and you're accountable does change behavior. And I am human. I do that too. So this study looks really at pre-diabetes. So I'm going to go through just a couple of introductions here. I think the background gets you a pretty good understanding of what we really could see in their findings. And that is, okay, so we know that several types of cancer increase with people with diabetes. We've seen that for years. You can Google that. We know that it's not just the high blood sugar, but it's the high insulin and the inflammation that changes how their cells live and how the hormones in their body really are linked to these two diseases. what this study really looked to do was to say, if we just look at that A1C, that average blood sugar, could that be a predictor of who's got an increased risk for cancer? And although breast cancer is one of them that we're talking about here, I liked this article because it had not just breast cancer, but they're looking at several types of cancers. This is going to be the first study I go through, and then we're going to go to a different one because it leaves people wondering. I'll give you the results, but I want to go down here a little bit further. This data revealed that the chronic high blood sugar does correlate with increased cancer risk in a number of cancers. Prostate cancer was backwards in this one. So I don't know what to mean. I don't know how to think through that. But I'm going to take the time to go through a couple of statements here that I thought were very helpful. So we know that there is a very strong association with endometrial, liver, pancreatic cancer, kidney, esophageal, colorectal, breast, and bladder cancer, as well as leukemia, that these had an increased risk of developing cancers in people who had diabetes. When they had diabetes, these were the cancers that increased significantly. They separated significantly early in, we've known this for several years. This paper specifically is looking at what happens when it's precancer, when you're like me, when you're like lots of my patients, like, Doc, I'm not diabetic. My blood sugars are only 115, only 100, which is where I've been. All right, we do know that several of the other parts about looking at the importance of not just hemoglobin A1C, which they're talking about here, saying, yes, we know that the hemoglobin A1C is something that allows us to look at that average blood sugar. Again, we've been talking about that a lot on the show, and we want you to be the ones who care about this, not really just your doctor or me. The other part that I wanted to point out in the introduction was that there is this, that when you say, well, why is the link between diabetes and cancer so prominent? It's like, that's not argued about anymore. Is once they have diabetes, we know they have an increased risk of cancer. The real answer is because of that link of inflammation. This goes into, it doesn't go into all of them, but I had a couple of the papers that I almost picked, but it got a little too deep in the woods here that I didn't think most people would pay attention. All right, so I'm going to go down here and say there is the punchline here is what I wanted to show. Because what the rest of this study does is it says, yeah, hey, guess what? That here's how we did this. Here's how we studied this. The answers showed a very clear correlation that the higher increasing risk of, so what were they looking at in the end? They wanted to see, was there a dose response for people whose blood sugars rose in the risks for their cancers. And there was an increasing risk for breast cancer, colorectal cancer, gastric cancer, and pancreatic cancer, all linked to the higher the hemoglobin A1C, meaning the higher the average blood sugar without being diabetic, the higher the increase risk for those cancers. Prostate cancer was backwards. I don't understand that, but I won't try to. That when you start to get, they get into a numbers game here that I'm not going to try to explain. I read it for it's probably, let's not talk about how long that took me to understand, and I don't want to try to explain it. Okay, so the punchline that they went to, what was the final conclusion when you go through all their charts and all their math, because it is an interesting, you are trying to predict whether or not that high blood sugar correlated to their risk for cancer. And they said, yes, the pre-diabetic and the normal ranges for blood sugar were found when they had colorectal, gastric, pancreatic, and respiratory cancers. That the cancer incidence is higher in hemoglobin A1C levels in the diabetic range for the colorectal, gastric, pancreatic, breast, and liver. And they hedge. There's a possible evidence. This is where they said, if you have high blood sugars, you may decrease your risk of prostate cancer. Again, I don't understand that. But that the increased risk for breast cancer incidence in a diabetic, pre-diabetic, and normal range has pretty possible evidence. So I always find when studies do this, where you're trying to explain this and say, how do I give that to a patient? How do I tell them, okay, we've got several studies. This study was done by really smart people who had a great idea for saying, can I tell a patient with a good level of confidence, that by lowering their average blood sugar, we're lowering their risk of these different types of cancers. What they concluded for that is, if the patient was diabetic or pre-diabetic, and we're talking about breast cancer, yes, I can be confident that by lowering their blood sugars, by getting out of that pre-diabetic range, by getting out of the diabetic range, we are decreasing the risk of breast cancers. That we also can be confident in the colorectal cancers, the gastric cancers, your pancreatic cancers, the respiratory cancers, all said, yes, in the pre-diabetic and normal ranges, we saw a decreased risk when we lowered their blood sugars. Again, they did not have the diagnosis of diabetes. Breast cancer is the increased risk of breast cancer incidence in a diabetic, pre-diabetic, and normal range has possible evidence. So I find that very difficult to translate into how do you help patients say, what should I do? Well, is it worth it? Lowering this average blood sugar, let me tell you, is not easy when it's already out of those pre-diabetic ranges. I'm not in the pre-diabetic range. I want to get it into the safety zone for some other reasons: brain function, aging function, inflammatory markers. This study says we're pretty insightful that when it's diabetic, or when it's getting those blood sugars are high enough that when you lower it, you made a difference. But they're not willing to step out and say, well, we think there's possible evidence if you do it before the numbers are in the diabetic range. So let's go to the other study, which I think gives a little more clarity. Okay, let's go back and get you to this one. Okay, so this article was inflammation of mammary adipose tissues occurs in overweight and obese patients exhibiting early stage breast cancer. So again, when they have breast cancer, we have lots of evidence that their blood sugars should come down. Decreasing the A1C is a good idea. But what this study looked at was, I think it gives a better, clearer answer for specifically, let's look at breast cancer. And then we're not just looking at the A1C, we're looking at obesity. So I wish I could blow this up a little higher for you, but I will underline as I go. The growing evidence indicates that adiposity, which just means how many fat cells people have, is associated with breast cancer and negatively affects the breast cancer recurrence, meaning and survival. They have higher recurrence and higher survival when they have more fat cells. I better actually push this little guy back there to get that out there. So the deposits of the higher the adipose higher the fat cells is essentially what that's saying. The occurrence of this sub-inflammatory state of mammary adipose tissue, and they look very carefully at how many dying adipocytes surrounded by macrophages, meaning those are the people that come in and clean up when cells are severely inflamed. And as much as pathology can get boring for you, I think it gives us this specific process of how are human tissues affected in a setting of high blood sugar. This crown-like structure, you're going to see the CLS mentioned throughout the study. So it's a change in how the cells look right before it dies, right before those kind of garbage trucks come in and clean it up. But in overweight or obese subjects, which means people, remains almost only partially described. So that's why they're doing this. So we're going to skip down. I'm going to show you the results in just a second. I'll come back and read this to you before we get done, because I think it does a really good job of saying, hey, guess what? We do have some very clear answers here. The article starts with some really nice reviews, again, showing you that, guess what? We can see that when people have cancer and they have high blood sugars, that there are several blood tests, there are several processes going on inside their systems that we've known about for years, that we are able to see patterns of in patients that are overweight. let me just say this out loud. So there's a huge body of evidence that is clinical and preclinical showing that adiposity, or being overweight, is associated with breast cancer and may affect the prognosis of how you live afterwards. These observations have recently been supported by some of these geek studies. They look deep in the cells. They look at how the cells respond. Then they look at some of the inflammatory markers, like what are the hormones like? What's their cholesterol? What's their lipids look like? This adipokines, have you heard of cytokines? This is like the same inflammatory markers that are found in fat cells. And then the pro-inflammatory mediators, all that are associated with breast cancer. It gets into some details down here. I actually really want to focus on this. So this chart gives us a really good idea of what these authors were looking at and why I'm taking the time to go through this on a YouTube, this is kind of geeky, but I think this is important. Okay, so we're going to look at these people with breast cancer and watching to see when their body mass index was less than 25, and when their body mass index was over 25. The average age for these folks was, let's just go back here. The average age for these folks was 53 when they were the leaner version, and it was 57 when they were in the, you can't even say overweight. 25 is overweight, so yes, actually you can say overweight. That I wanted to go down to look at so they used DEXA scans to look at their truncal fat, like where did they put their fat, and these have a higher fat around the middle. So you look at apple shape versus pear shape. Does that have anything to do with when these inflammatory markers are found inside the patient's fat tissues when they biopsied them? And then they looked at when their body mass index was lower, what was their total cholesterol? These numbers are European, so that looks probably pretty funny to most people. But also looking at the HDL, that's the good cholesterol, your triglycerides, that C-reactive protein is another I think it's beautiful to see. Look at that. The difference between their C-reactive protein when they were under 25, a body mass index of 25 versus when they were over. And then here's that average glucose. Again, my A1C was 5.6 at the beginning of July when I was mad, and 5.27 is what the folks' hemoglobin A1C was like when they were under a body mass index of 25. So essentially what they're looking at are these two groups of people, all who had risks, and when they would decrease their body weight, whether or not they've, what's gone on in their breast cancer history before, the lower their body weight, there were several other things associated with that, and it correlated to an improved outcome. I'm going to go to the conclusion down here, read this to you, and then we're going to have a discussion about this. I hope I haven't lost you. So the results, actually, I'm going to read you the summary paragraph at the top. It does a better job, actually. I said I would come back and read that. Our results have said that patients have overweight patients and obese patients have a 3.2 and almost 7 times higher odds of this crown-like structures, which means these are the inflammatory parts that happen when the cells that are in their tissues are about to turn cancerous. That show signs of cancer when you get at a deeper cellular level. I mean, when you look at the first study, it was looking at who was diagnosed with breast cancer. And we know that there are several inflammatory processes that happen at a cellular level that we could confidently say, if you have breast cancer and your A1C is diabetic, you lowering it did a great job. What this study looks at, and what the other study was trying to hedge on, saying, well, we think there's some evidence here, is they were looking at, could we stamp the chart with cancer? And the answer was, there's not quite enough high of numbers. In this study, they were looking at all of the cellular changes that occur with cancer, and can you see them getting worse when patients have more fat on their bodies, specifically fat around the middle. And not only did they see a higher blood sugar associated with that was not diabetic. Again, it's not even pre-diabetic. It's just a higher blood sugar did increase the risk of all these inflammatory markers. So let me finish reading this. Okay, let's see. A relative small increase in adipocytes size, meaning how big were the fat cells, in the crown-like structures, positive versus negative patients suggest that mammary adipose tissue inflammation, which sounds weird, but that means the fat tissue in the breast it shows tissue inflammation and occurs early during the hypertrophy. Hypertrophy means the replication of cancer cells. I hope I'm not losing you guys here. I'll say our results further highlight that body mass index is an adequate predictor for the presence of this inflammatory process that's happening right before the diagnosis of breast cancer happens, essentially. And that the mammary adipose tissue inflammation is more likely to occur in patients exhibiting this thick middle. So if you don't want to prick your finger and check A1Cs like I do, measure your abdominal girth. What is the circumference around at your belly button? And increasing that definitely is the correlation that leads to a correlation of these increased inflammatory markers and several other things. Your C-reactive protein was higher. Your the lipoprotein cholesterol ratio was higher. Your hemoglobin A1C was higher. And as we watch to say, when patients say, "Doc, can you give me some advice? Can you say that by decreasing by going on your ketogenic diet, do you think I'm doing anything to help prevent the onset of cancer that happened in?" And then think of someone in their family. And you can see why I'm hedged to answer some of these questions, because it is when people ask that broad question, the answers are in the specifics. And you say, well, let's talk about liver cancer. Let's talk about endometrial cancer. Let's talk about breast cancer. And that first study shows, when they have a hemoglobin A1C that is in the diabetic range, I can be pretty confident. You should lower that. It does decrease your risk of cancer. It does decrease how well you're going to survive cancer. It does, by lowering your blood sugar, it increases how you'll survive cancer. It increases how you'll handle that will you have a recurrence? What I hate actually is that the details are in that second study where we say, we need a huge population. We're going to have to study those people with cancer for 15 to 20 years to be able to say, do we have the mathematical data to be able to stamp on their chart, this is what you should do? And the answer is we don't have that data yet. What we do have data for, though, is if you look at a cellular level, and we know that the inflammatory process for increasing what happens in a cancer setting, what happens when a cell makes a mistake and now starts to replicate or hypertrophy, that's what that one word was about. That cellular hypertrophy grows when the inflammatory markers are higher. And when we look at why do I put so much energy into teaching people about a ketogenic diet? And that is that there is plenty of evidence, especially at a cellular level, that the removal of the inflammatory markers or the decrease to the lowest inflammatory state possible not only enhances the way your brain will age and the way your brain will function for however much time God gives you on this earth, but it also decreases several of these chronic diseases of aging. And one of those is cancer. That reversing diabetes, yes, it's lovely. People think, okay, I've got diabetes and I got rid of my diabetes and my A1C is now down to 6.2. And my first reaction is, keep going, keep going. Is your waistline littler than your hip line? Is your waist circumference smaller than your hip circumference? Is your body mass index less than 25? And that's what that second study was showing you, is that we know that, yes, I'm reaching for a hemoglobin A1C of 4.8. And we've had a few people write in saying, that's excessive, you don't need to do that. And I'm like, look at the cellular data. Look at that inflammatory markers found in people who have an A1C that's in the 4.5. There's not a lot of them out there. We don't have a lot of studies looking at that. Like, why should we care? But when you start to say, in the folks who've had a cancer, and breast cancer was the specific one we were looking for, and we take their waistline and we make it littler, oh, guess what? Their A1C got better. When they got that body mass index from above 25, which is overweight, to less than 25, we decrease the risk of what happens inside the fatty tissue of a breast right before the cancer is now, okay, officially we can say cancer, that pre-inflammatory state that happens to a cell right before the hypertrophy, right before it starts to excessively produce. And this is what gives me the passion to say, you should all be reaching for a lower level. When you walk into your doctor's office and ask, can you help me with this, doc? I'm telling you, I couldn't help people with that on a one-on-one basis. The amount of education that it takes to do that, and the amount of time my nurse would have to spend on the phone getting their insurance company to cover an A1C when they don't have cancer, when they don't have diabetes, they don't even have pre-diabetes, your insurance company won't do it. We'll fight with them, and in the end, they win. They don't cover it. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't care about it. That you don't have to prick your finger to learn that you're at risk for this. You can take a measuring tape around your belly button area, around the waistline, and then you compare it to your hip line, and the waistline should be less. We know that the wider that waistline gets, the higher the adipose content in that central truncal fat. That's what that one study was looking at. So don't spend any money. Get a ruler. Measure how long is your waistline. And if it is, if your waistline is bigger than your hip line, step one, getting that weight off is the first weight that dramatically improves on a ketogenic diet. It is very inflammatory, and we know that that is what is signaling several of the markers for heart disease, for cancer, and of course for diabetes. Okay, so that's a lot of information. I'm going to go to your questions now and see did I hit the mark on how you guys interpreted this. Oh, I do want to say a very important thing. Today is October 11th. Happy birthday to my sister. Mom's not here to write a card this year, so I'm terrible at cards, but I did not forget. Happy birthday. I'm looking at October 11th going, happy birthday, happy birthday. All right, let's get on to some education. I hope she's laughing at me. She knows better than to rely on me for a card. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's going to be set up for, we're both going to struggle. All right, so we are going to start with this. I'm going to go here. Let's go here. I want to move this. Hold on. Let's take this, go like this. Oh, there we go. Okay, my A1C went up from 5.4 to 5.7, but my fasting insulin went from 7.4 to 5. I've been keto low carb for a year. Is that okay? A female at age 47. This is a great question. It doesn't have to do with cancer, but this is awesome because this is why I stopped doing insulins. Because the patient, if they were only looking at their insulin, they would say, look, doc, my A1C or my insulin went down. And what I would say is don't trust your insulin. Insulin is a lovely idea for people to follow, but insulin is so volatile. Like if you had a catheter in your, when they do this, look on studies for what is the insulin doing. The insulin is so easy to move that if one day you check the insulin at 7 o'clock and the second day you checked it at 7:15, you can't necessarily compare the two of those insulins. It's too volatile. It moves too easily. If you're driving to the lab to check your insulin and a kid takes out on the street in front of your car on his bike and you have to slam on the brakes, that raises your heart rate. That releases some cortisol. That is enough stress that you'll change your insulin. Your insulin went higher in response to that cortisol surge, in response to the glucose. Now you can't compare the two. So the volatility of insulin is what is sometimes underappreciated in a laboratory data. The other part that I am very quick to point out is, who cares what the insulin level is in you today? How are your cells listening to insulin? And this is really speaking to insulin resistance. In a system of insulin resistance, as the sugars go higher, your body says, that's how we die. We have to keep those blood sugars low. And so it will use more insulin to keep that blood sugar controlled. So when they say, yeah, my blood sugar went from 5.4 to 5.7, but my insulin went from 7.5 down to 5, what happened? Well, it was taking less insulin, and that is if it was perfect. If this is like, if we could do your average insulin and then say this is what the effective insulin is this would be the average amount of insulin. I don't know. So if you could trust that the insulin was a true reflection of how much insulin he was making, by decreasing the amount of insulin, if that A1C was 5.4 2 years, or let's say 6 months ago, and now it's 5.7, the blood sugars have risen. But if it takes less insulin to control that blood sugar, it means that you're more insulin sensitive. Now, the truth is your insulin's you're gonna be less sensitive if it continues to rise. You continually have to decrease that morning fasting blood sugar, and raise your morning ketones in order to really continue to work on the insulin sensitivity. So over a period of time, if you're getting healthier, your cells listen to insulin better, which means you do not need to make as much for it to have the same impact on getting that glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells. When the cells are more sensitive to insulin, that insulin hops over that cell membrane, uses that receptor to hop into the cell, inside the cell instead of the bloodstream, and that's the job of insulin. When it listens very astutely, then your average blood sugar, your insulin amount, you don't need to make as much to do that. So when the insulin drops, but the blood sugar went up, I would say quit checking that. Don't waste your money on insulin. Meaning you can check it once, but it really is just, I don't find it useful. I find it very useful to say, check your morning fasting glucose, check your morning fasting ketones, use them in a ratio. I call it the Dr. Boz ratio. You can use different metrics and call it the GKI. I don't care which one you use. The lower that Dr. Boz ratio, the lower the GKI, the more sensitive your insulin is. And that's where healing really begins. When I look at the keto continuum, it is not like a keto accomplishment. It is that you pull that system to a stable level, and for the season of life they're in, hold still. Try not to go backwards. And then look at some numbers like A1C. If that A1C is in that 4.8, then give yourself a pat on the back and say you're doing better than Dr. Boz. But if it's not, lowering that blood sugar into a place that is that true badge of health only is associated with morning sugars that are in the 70s and 80s, maybe even the 60s, and ketones that are present in the morning. When people wake up and say, Doc, my ketones in the morning are terrible, I can pretty confidently say that you're making a lot of glucose from that signal of the pineal gland saying, hey, wake up. And that means there's a lot of glucose in your liver. That glucose in your liver didn't happen overnight. It happened over years. And to make it go away, it does take consistent, stable reduction in the numbers. And I'm definitely continuing to work on that too. So very good question. The answer is no, it's not okay for your A1C to go up. It might be a sign of health, but it also might be a reflection that you should just be checking your Dr. Boz ratio and say, what's that? And look at your A1C more than just, that's why I'm checking. I try to do it every 4 weeks. And again, we're about it every 5 or 6 weeks. Let's go to Tina. Is it necessary to continue to fast to the 72-hour mark when your blood sugar is 49 and ketone 6.2? Okay, Tina, so the real question is, what are you fasting for? When people say, the keto continuum is, again, getting people's metabolism really flexible, meaning they can clip over and make ketones really quickly when their glucose falls. It's also, there's a lot of psychology involved with what does it look like to not eat. Don't go to a funeral where everybody looks like your mother. When the last funeral you went to was your mother's, because the emotion was a lot for me in the last 2 days. Looking at the reason you fast. The reason I fast is to continue to work on my numbers. I'm definitely trying to get my A1C down, but I also feel better. I know that my improvement in my health and my brain function is way better when I am fasting. That getting to a 72 hours is where I see as the best acquisition of a stress to produce growth hormone, to produce norepinephrine, to lower that insulin, to empty out the storage of your glycogen. When you get ketones of 6.2 and your blood sugar is 49, I guarantee you've emptied out all your stored glycogen. You're now in gluconeogenesis. Staying in gluconeogenesis for, a day or so is not a bad thing. I will push people to say, if you got those numbers and it's 6 o'clock at night and the sun is setting, I wouldn't eat. I would try to fast till the morning. I would try to break their fast when the sun is rising, not break your fast at the end of the day. Now, am I guilty of not always following that? Absolutely. But when I know that the best stimulus of growth hormone, the best stimulus of norepinephrine is that you match the food with when your glycogen naturally rises, which is what happens first thing in the day. So eating late at night, you're going to have terrible numbers for a couple of days. So I would push you to not do that. The other thing is, if you're fasting because you're trying to wring out inflammation, every time you get to a Dr. Boz ratio of 20 or less, you're doing a good job. The longer you can hold that, as long as it's under 72 hours, the benefit versus the detriment, everything has a balancing act. And when you are over the age of 50, and especially over the age of 60, and even worse when it's 75, and you fast for longer than 72 hours, there is a compromise that begins to happen about using proteins as nutrition. So I don't want you touching the proteins. Now, even in the setting of really high ketones, we know that there is a protein breakdown that happens much more likely after 72 hours than before 72 hours. So in the first 3 days, I can be pretty confident to saying to a large group of people, I can put it in my book, KetoCONTINUUM, and say, 72-hour fasts do a ton of good. The benefit outweighs the risk once they're keto adapted, once they're in that zone of being able to produce ketones. If they get to a place where they're fasting 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, I'm like, first of all, you're not going to do that very many times in your life. I think fasting 72 hours is hard. Doing 72 hours, 8 weeks in a row it's a badge of honor that you have learned to master saying no to food. There's a lot of psychology in 8 consecutive, meaning nothing else got in your way. You did it 8 consecutive weeks. That's powerful. That tells me a ton about the psychology of the patient I'm working with. It also tells me that their metabolism has definitely gone under a huge metabolic stress. So if the reason Tina went in and was fasting for 72 hours was to lose, hopefully it wasn't to lose weight. You shouldn't fast to lose weight. Go keto to lose weight. Fasting really just pushes that metabolism to really, you're going to lose weight if you fast routinely every week. But actually, I don't lose weight, especially if I don't do very good on the days where I eat. All right, let's hope I answer that question. Let's go to the next one. All right, Karen, Dr. Boz, do you know anything about hyperbaric oxygen chambers for treating or killing cancer? Well, I happen to know a lot about that, actually. Hyperbaric oxygen chamber is something that we had Grandma Rose use in her treatment. So again, her cancer was of the white blood cells. It was sugar dependent. We didn't know that at the beginning. But we also knew that if you've read Any Way You Can, she had a severe complication and she had to have a surgery that was not what we were planning on and not easy to navigate. But we needed to really have her respond well to the next round of chemotherapy. So she fasted for 40 days. Again, there's a whole bunch of other things going on, and she was under the direct supervision of me, a physician. Don't fast for 40 days without a little help. And then when we were trying to heal a wound from a surgery, and hyperbaric oxygen is again, it's a high level of oxygen that's being perfused into tissue, especially tissue that's fragile, like one that's just had surgery. In a case where cancer is involved, there is very good evidence that hyperbaric oxygen chambers. So here's the protocol we followed, and there are studies of this out there. I will not link them because it gets me in. Anyway, Google it, you'll find it. When you look at the place where I used hyperbaric oxygen chamber, it was whenever she would have her chemotherapy, she would fast for 72 hours before the chemotherapy. The chemotherapy would go in, and then afterwards she would be in the hyperbaric oxygen chamber for sometimes 4 or 5 hours. We actually bought one for her home. She lived 100 miles away from the hospital, so it was just too onerous to drive back and forth to the hyperbaric oxygen chamber, because there's ones you can rent a couple hours. And after a chemo setting, you can see people get benefit for a couple of hours. Repairing tissue, as well as fighting what cancers don't like, which is the free radicals that happen when that oxygen concentration is high. And you say, wait a minute, we don't want free radicals. I'm like, healthy cells can handle the free radicals. The cancer cells could not handle the free radicals, and they had apoptosis. They died. The cancer cells would die more frequently under that high oxygen pressure. So they would have a reactive oxygen species, which is essentially a free radical. It's a super free radical. But cancer cells do not do well around that. High oxygen concentrations are how you get those. A hyperbaric oxygen chamber is something she would sleep in. She would go in for 4 or 5 hours. She'd sleep in it at night. And we just said, whenever she'd get just not feeling well, she'd go in the chamber. Athletes use them. The chamber is now at my house, and I use it when I'm crabby and not feeling good. But so does my son, who's a wrestler. If there's been a really hard workout and he's inflamed, I'll say, okay, sleep in the chamber. And safe, easy, cheap is a relative word. I do think that the cost of a hyperbaric oxygen chamber is around $5,000. So, but I'll tell you, when you're done using it, you will not find them for very long on the used market. They get snatched up pretty easily. I don't have anything to do with that, though. So let's see. We have quite a few questions here. So I know it's getting to the top of the hour, but actually, but not too anymore. We're going to try to get through a couple more of these. Let's go here. Mary says, does this apply to reduced recurrence of breast cancer if one lowers? Yeah, so that's what I was trying to get at. Thank you for helping me clarify this, Mary. Does the study, again, where the inflammatory markers, those pro-inflammatory markers, were less in the people who had, let me just make sure, I want to show you this. So she's asking, does lowering the A1C help with estrogen dominance? Yeah, estrogen is very fat soluble. It's made from fat and cholesterol, and it is used properly when you're not inflamed. It's when estrogen gets a little rogue, when it's in the soup of inflammation. Let me go over to this one right here. Here we go. So I want to go back to this part of the study just to drive home this point, because your question is very, very good. So when we look at these are, again, the characteristics of breast cancer patients and the tumors. So when the patients had the lower, where's my pen? We're going to change colors here to red. Okay. So this column is the lower weight, and then I'm going to circle the one with yellow for fat maybe. This is where they had higher weight. When you look at, yes, you can see that. So now, if I do this little fella and say, when we look at the A1C, a lower A1C with a lower body weight had less aggressive cancers, less of that inflammatory markers, less of the invasion of these pro-inflammatory markers. When we look at the I was looking at the HDL to LDL ratio is really how they were talking about this. The triglyceride to LDL ratio, all of those improved when there was less pathology that looked like that is the pre-breast cancer pathology. I mean, it has to have certain findings from the pathologist to say the word cancer, but there's this phase right before that. And that's what we could see when did it create the environment for cancer to be higher, to reoccur, and that we could see at a cellular level that cancer was on its way back. And yes, that was what correlated to a higher average blood sugar. So we can't stamp in the big headline, yes, you are going to decrease the risk of all cancers when you have a lower hemoglobin A1C. We do not have the evidence for that. It takes too big of a study. It would take too many years. But just like when my mother's cancer was sugar dependent, and she had all of these high inflammatory markers when we started this journey. She was 60 to 70 pounds overweight. She had been for years. She had high C-reactive protein. She had high triglycerides. She had low HDL. Everything that I didn't want her to have, she had. And it wasn't until we got on a very strict ketogenic diet that all of these numbers improved. And although she still had complications with her health, the cancer was, I mean, you can't ever say the word cured with the kind of cancer she had, but it was really small. I mean, it was hard to find it. And I think the chances of that cancer relapsing, where she stayed away from those numbers for the 4 years before she got COVID, it was powerful to see what her body did and how well it stayed away from that pre-inflammatory soup that is very correlated to, on a cellular level especially, what cancer looks like under the microscope. I hope I'm saying that in a way that you understand. It's a good question. I'm trying to answer it very clearly without misspeaking. You can see why, oopsie, wrong one, why I don't do this on a broad level. All right, Timothy, does donating a plasma affect ketones? I have no idea. If you want to do a study on that, I would gladly look at your numbers before and after. I don't know. I've not had enough people donate plasma. I know they don't. I don't know. I have no idea. Josie says, should I be taking bitter melon supplements to lower blood glucose? It works, but is it a good thing? Okay, so this is a great moment where the supplements that I recommend, they've got to have really good evidence. Do I think there might be a study out there that says bitter melon supplements lower blood sugar? Sure, but why? Again, sometimes the way I have medications that lower your blood sugar, but they raise your insulin. So I know how they work because they have to prove to the FDA before I can prescribe them how they work. If somebody was a breast cancer patient and I was giving them what they call insulin secretagogue, meaning that produces more insulin for that patient, I would not in good conscience be helping that patient. I would be hurting that patient. When you look at the pathology about why a drug works, that's the beauty of what Western medicine binds with supplements or with other approaches is until you know the pathology about why a process works, recommending it or not recommending it it's a flip of a coin. You don't know. So I would say don't mess with that. Don't spend your money there. Put your money on sardines or not eating or a support group. And you don't need a money for support group. You need a people for support group. Those are the kinds of things when I look at how do you lower blood sugar. As soon as I stepped away from that 21-day course and started getting busy with all these other things, my blood sugar definitely has gone up. But I'm committed. I come back here every week to you guys, and I'm going to be checking my numbers here in just a minute. And I know they're higher because I can tell you I feel better. I feel better than I did at the beginning of the show. I was crabby. I have not slept well in 2 days. I have definitely been irritable. And I'm not right now. I feel better. Let's do a couple more numbers here while I answer your questions. Let's go to this one. All right. Leslie says, changes her life. Have you read the new study about insulinemia and breast cancer? I haven't read it. Let's go to Gina. would you ever recommend berberine? Yeah, again, berberine's process is the same pathophysiology as what metformin is trying to do. The problem with berberine is nobody's regulating it. Nobody looks at it. And I know that there's good companies out there and they say that they third-party check. I'm telling you, metformin does the same thing, and it is highly regulated by the United States federal government. And as many things as they do mess up, metformin is cheap, easy, generic, and safe. And it is truly a, so my blood sugar 89, ketones counting down to 0.6. I bet you if I check it in like another 2 minutes, it'll be higher because I can feel it. So let's go to the next question. So berberine's not bad. I just think it's metformin. And metformin is much cleaner. Like, it takes 15 berberine to equal 1 of the 500 milligrams of metformin. I'd take metformin. It's just cleaner and cheaper and predictable. I'm an oncology chaplain at Level 1 hospital. I see cancer patients and what they eat, lots of sugar. How can I counsel patients toward low carb without violating my scope of care? Very carefully, Matthew. I'm telling you, don't step onto the dark side without knowing what you're doing. Honestly, I had a couple of the most inspiring stories that I've ever. I don't even know if I've shared them on this show. The process of watching people die it changes people. It changes you. There's nothing like a funeral over the last 2 days for me to just really reflect on you get a short trip. And in your career, when God puts you in a place where you watch them die, I think it's our job. It's our to honor what our role is to share that changes who we are. And to watch people who are in a journey of taking care of the cancer and how can you help them. I'm sure this sounds like I am proselytizing, but I'd give them the book any way you can. I'd let them read a good story. It's a love story about a mother and a daughter who really wanted to help her mom. And as I buried one of her siblings over the last 3 days, the health of her siblings isn't much better than hers. That family of origin is strong in their faith. They love their God, and they're hard workers, every one of them. But nobody taught them how to eat right. And in fact, I didn't do a very good job of helping people do that until she said, I'm done. I'm not doing what you say anymore. This sucks. I don't want to do what your medicine did to me. And I really think that's what God's path was for me, to say, yes, I need to tell this story. I need to tell the story. And even though it got me plenty of, how dare you not follow the guidelines, I still use very much evidence-based medicine. But I also know that nutrition is most important, what you're feeding your cells on a daily basis. And some of the tools that you can master without your doctor is where medicine is going. So if you've not seen the story of my mom and how she died of COVID, I will link that to the end of this. It's a heartbreaker, so be careful. I'll see you next week, guys.